Hi, welcome to Hillcrest Sermons, growing together.
Show us your heart's delight.
I want to invite you to pull out your Bible and notebook and pen. And if we're going to be what Dee just read, we're going to be in Romans chapter 12 today. If you're new, my name's Tim. Welcome. But we're going to be in Romans chapter 12. You can start flipping there. Romans is it's a New Testament way to the right, after Acts and before First Corinthians, and that's where we're going to be spending our time this morning. So there's a study, the Harvard study of adult development, started in 1938. They took 724 different participants, and they decided they're going to follow them over the entirety of their lives. Check in every 2 years. Do in-depth, in-person interviews and then questionnaires to try and see. It was one of the largest longitudinal studies ever done on people. To try to see over a lifetime, what are the factors that most influence the outcomes of a person's life? And, 1938, so most of the original participants now have passed away. Follow these folks 80, 90 years. And this study it's come to the conclusion that there's this one thing that more than anything else drives the amount of happiness and health in a person's life. It's one factor. And I will tell you what that is before today is over. But now I want us to look at Romans chapter 12. Because I think the book of Romans is going to point us in the same direction. All right, so Romans 12. Romans 12 is this pivot in the book of Romans. So Romans 1 through 11 outlines. First of all, so it's this guy, the leader in the Jesus movement, Paul. He's writing a letter to the followers of Jesus, these house churches in Rome, and the first 11 chapters is really outlining what God has done for humankind in the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. And how through Jesus, God is undoing sin and death, and how someone can step in and trust Jesus and be delivered to life and life eternal. So that's the first 11 chapters. And then in chapter 12, there's this pivot, this hinge moment that happens. And what we read in chapter 12, beginning of verse 1 is this. It says, therefore, so it's kind of like in light of the first 11 chapters, of course, Paul didn't put the chapters, that was later on, but in light of everything I've said, therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, which is the first 11 chapters, in view of all that God did for us in Jesus, in view of all that, therefore, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. So he's pulling, this is a metaphor, an image that anybody in the ancient Mediterranean world would have been familiar with, and, sacrifice. People went to temples, sacrificed animals to different deities, and of course, if you sacrifice an animal, the animal is totally devoted over to the deity. And Paul uses this image, and he says, hey, I want you to think of your life this way, that in view of, as you are grasped by God's mercy for you in Jesus, that you would begin to devote your entire life over, as a living sacrifice, over to worshiping, to following, to walking with this God. This is your proper response to being grasped by the mercy of God. This is the image. I read a quote this week that I think captures this. Abraham Joshua Heschel says, unless living is a form of worship, our worship has no life. That the degree of which we are collectively giving our lives over, that's going to show up as we gather together for worship. He says, hey, in view of God's mercy, give your life, devote your bodies over. And then he continues, verse 2, kind of continuing the same theme. He unpacks a little further. Verse 2, he says, do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. It's interesting, in the first part he says, offer your bodies. Here, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. It's this kind of holistic approach. He says, then you will be able to attest and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. So, verses 1 and 2, it's really simple when you boil it down. It's just the simple idea that as a person is grasped by the mercy of God poured out for us in Jesus, that we begin this lifetime process, heart, mind, body, and soul, of offering ourselves, of being transformed to look and to feel and to think and to act and to speak more like Jesus. And it's not something we just do in our own energy. The Spirit is working inside of us, but we're becoming more like Jesus. The theological word for this is sanctification. You'll hear this sometimes. With sanctification, the process of being made holy, being made to look, think, and act and feel and speak more like Jesus. Now, when you hear sanctification, being made holy, my guess is a lot of us have caricatures, images, feelings, thoughts that pop into our minds. When you hear sanctification, being made holy, what are some of the first things that pop into your mind? Just shout some of them out. Halo. Yeah, we get to grow a halo. It's phenomenal. Yeah. What else pops in your mind? White, the color white. What else? Worship. What else? Set apart. Yeah, what else? Light, yeah, we'll be glowing, have the halo, got white robes. This is where we're right. Well, we have these ideas attached to these things, and for me, I hear sanctification. I tend to think maybe quote unquote spiritual things. So praying more, reading the Bible more, learning more theology. And I tend to think maybe individual things I do, I don't tell lies. I don't use these words. Kind of these individual spiritual things. And those are part of the process of spiritual transformation. But what I want to do for a moment is look at, so this Romans 12, 1 and 2, it really is kind of like a thesis statement. It's this hinge point, this thesis statement for the next several chapters of the book of Romans, where Paul unpacks all the different things that spiritual transformation means. So the rest of Romans chapter 12, 13, 14, 15, he's unpacking. This is spiritual transformation means this. Spiritual transformation means that. And I want to point out a particular thread that shows up of how Paul talks about spiritual transformation. So Paul, he continues on in chapter 12, and I'm going to jump around. Notice these are all things under the heading of spiritual transformation. Chapter 12, verse 5, he says, so in Christ, we, though many, form one body, and each member belongs to all the others. There's this kind of belonging to one another. Chapter 12, verse 10, be devoted to one another in love. Honor one another above yourselves. Verse 13, share with the Lord's people who are in need. Practice hospitality. Verse 15, rejoice with those who rejoice. Mourn with those who mourn. Verse 18, if it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Chapter 13, it continues on. Chapter 13, verse 8. Let no debt remain outstanding except the continuing debt to love one another. For whoever loves others has fulfilled the law. Chapter 14, jump down to verse 19. Let us, therefore, make every effort to do what leads to peace and to mutual edification. Chapter 15, verse 1. We who are strong ought to bear with the failings of the weak, not to please ourselves. So now, when I look at those, when Paul's, chapter 12, 1 and 2, thesis statement, throughout the next several chapters, he's unpacking what spiritual transformation looks like. What I see as one of the major threads is that we are transformed in how we handle relationships. How we our ability to love others, our ability to communicate that love in a way that's meaningful, our ability to handle conflict, our ability to be in relationship with people who think differently that we disagree with, our ability to maintain real peace in relationships, our ability to enter in and join other people in their emotional states in a way that means something to them. These are all things about relationships, all about relationships, right? These aren't things they're not maybe quote unquote spiritual things, and they're not they're not things that I do by myself. They're things that I do in how I relate to others. And it seems to me that for Paul and for God who inspired Paul to write this, relational transformation is central to spiritual transformation. That if we are offering our bodies, we're being transformed into the image of Jesus, it will show up in our relationships with others in very practical, tangible ways. Which, I mean, it shouldn't be surprising. Jesus, when asked, what is the great commandment, Jesus? He says, well, it's very simple. It's love your Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. And it would make sense that central to growing into the image of Jesus is our ability to actually, not just like feel love, like, oh yeah, I feel it in my heart. I mean, those people think I'm mad at them, but I feel that, like, no, the actual, to be able to love people in all the difficulties and ambiguities of life in real and meaningful ways. Spiritual maturity includes relational maturity. In fact, relational transformation is central to spiritual transformation. It's not the only thing, but it seems a central part of it when I look at this. And let's be honest. If you are a human being, you need help with this. I need help with this. I think about where I've come from. This is a story my kids like to laugh at me about. 7th grade, little Tim in Mason, Michigan. He's got a girlfriend, Nikki. And it was a deep relationship. We had lunch together, and we went to a basketball game together once, varsity basketball game, and so we beat the odds. We really were able to kind of last, really stretch this relationship out, and so we're at about the 2-week mark, and I remember it's a Sunday night, and I'm getting ready for bed. My parents, I think they're already in bed. I'm like, okay, school next day, and all of a sudden I remember, tomorrow is Nikki's birthday. And I've done nothing for her. No present, no nothing. And so, with all the relational maturity I could muster in my little 7th grade head, I was like, I'm going to be embarrassed. I'm going to look stupid. People are going to think I'm like, don't know what I'm doing as a boyfriend. I made a decision. I decided I will never speak to her again. This is how I handled this situation. I will just act like we're strangers. And I assume wherever she is, she knows we're not together at this point. If somebody did that to one of my daughters, I would think they were as dumb as a rock. I did not start out with great relational maturity. The ability to understand the impact I'm having on others' lives. And I've made some progress. But I mean, still, I remember, early on when I was working here, I remember Christy and I would have arguments, and she'd be like, she'd be like, if those church people could only see you right now, and I am a work in progress. And if you are a human being, my guess is you are work in progress. And and I believe central, to be conformed into the image of Jesus, one big way that's going to show up is our real life, flesh and blood relationships with the people close to us, That's kind of in our friendships, our workplace relationships, our family, our friends, our housemates. That is that we will grow in maturity, our ability to handle those in ways that reflect the character of God. I think this is just central to spiritual transformation. We're starting this new series. Relational inTension is what we're calling the series. Learning from the church in Rome. And this is what we're going to be looking at. I do that part later on. Yeah. Now you can't wait. Relational inTension, but basically we're going to be looking at, our ability. Last winter we did this series on the loneliness epidemic in North America and how we live in this kind of relationally impoverished moment in time. And this winter, we're going to if last winter we looked at the things that kind of prevent relationships, this winter we're going to be looking at the things that once we're in relationships, damage and distort them. And we're going to be talking about that. Our heart is that we move from relationships in tension to intentional relationships. That's part of our spiritual journey. And so that's what we're going to be talking. We're going to be using Romans chapter 12 through 16 as our guiding text for this series, because the latter, what I've just tried to point out this morning already is the latter part of the book of Romans. Paul spends a lot of time talking about how spiritual transformation leads to relational transformation. So that's where we're going to be going in this series. All right, so in the next kind of the remaining time, I just kind of want to give a little preview of where this series is going and how this spiritual transformation works its way out in our relationships. So let's go back. I'm going to look at verse 2 again and just notice a couple things. So Romans chapter 12, verse 2. Let's see here. He says, do not conform to the pattern of this world. And so Paul recognizes that in our journey of spiritual transformation, there will be forces or pressures working against us. You could translate this. Do not be conformed. Do not allow this to happen to you. Do we have that next slide? Do we have it? Yeah. Do not allow yourself to be conformed. And then literally, it doesn't say this world. It says to the pattern of this age. Do not allow this age to press you into the shape it wants. Do not let the social pressures and the cultural conventions and even like your family of origin story press you into a deformed relational shape. Do not be conformed to the pattern of this age. This age is Paul's pulling on an idea that in the first century Jewish world that there was two ages. There was this age, the age of sin and wickedness and death, and then God would act, and then there would be an age to come, an age of justice and righteousness. And that Paul and the early followers of Jesus came to understand that these ages now overlap. That in Jesus, we still are in this age, but the age to come has broken into the present. And so we are meant to be age to come people while in the midst of this age. We are meant to be shaped by Jesus' age to come culture while surrounded by this age. And so Paul's just saying, do not be shaped into the pattern of this age, but rather be shaped into Jesus' age to come way of life. And this age, kind of the distortions of this age, I would say, that's sin working its way out in human societies and cultures and families. It shows up, the distortions of this age, it shows up in different ways in different societies and cultures. Sin works its way out in different ways. And kind of going back to that loneliness epidemic, we talked about this last winter. One of the ways the sin of this age is working its way out in North America right now is simply like the evaporation of relationships. That we live in a relationally impoverished cultural moment. And if you weren't here last winter, I would encourage you to go back and listen to the series Alone Together. We talked through the loneliness epidemic. And this is not just like a, Christians think. This is widespread. Sociologists all over the place are recognizing this. In fact, I saw the cover story of The Atlantic this month let's go to the next slide, is the antisocial century. That's the cover story. I mean, this is widely, we live in this kind of relationally impoverished moment. And I think that we as Christians, as missional Christians, should reflect on that and what does the good news look like in this cultural moment. But more than that, I also think, so kind of not only does the sin of this age, not only in our kind of culture, not only is it kind of evaporating relationships, but even once we are in relationships, they get conformed or distorted in all sorts of different ways. And that's really where this winter series is going to be focused. And so let me just name some of the things that I've observed, others have observed, and we're going to be talking about in greater detail. So busyness. Just the lack of presence to others. Instead of truly being present to another person, interacting with them as like a check mark on your task list. I know I fall into this. I remember a couple summers ago, I got to have a sabbatical here, and we spent the summer in Bethlehem. And when kind of stepping out of the got to get things done, I found this ability to be present to people kind of growing in me in a new way. We'd be walking through the streets of Bethlehem, and there was no gotta get these things done, and me and the family, and it's, a shopkeeper would be like, hey, friends, come, best tea in Palestine right here. And I'd turn to my family, I'd be like, it's the best tea in Palestine. Come on, yes, pull up a chair, friend, let's talk. And I remember I'd sit with this tea shopkeeper, and he showed me a picture when Conan O'Brien visited one time. I'm like, that's so cool. And you're just present to people, the ability to be present to people, to offer our full presence to them. Do you feel conformed to the pattern of busyness and this depersonalizing way of interacting with others? Busyness, technology. I wonder when I meet Jesus, if one of the ways my life will be evaluated is he'll show me these are the moments you could have been present to your kids and family, but instead we're on your phone, Tim. How much technology distorts our relational worlds. If you are a parent, if you are a grandparent, if you are a teacher, if you are an aunt, if you are an uncle, if you have not been reading up on what cell phones and social media are doing to adolescents today, I would say run to the bookstore. If you're unaware, the rates of teen anxiety and depression are demonstrably skyrocketing, and there seems to be a very strong correlation with cell phone, social media use. Books like Jonathan Haidt's The Anxious Generation, Jean Twangy's iGen, Andy Crouch, Tech Wise Family. This is more about how to live with technology in a family. This is just demonstratedly, this is distorting our relational world. How have you been pressed into conforming to technology in how you deal with relationships? Busyness, technology, mental health. And this could be both those of us who struggle with mental health, how tempting self-isolation can be. But also I think in a big way, for those of us who have people we care about who are dealing with anxiety or dealing with depression, the challenges that come to be in loving relationship with those who themselves are dealing with mental health issues. And that's a real challenge in our relational world today. Another big one, polarization. Have you guys, you've heard of this? Oh, a couple of us, yes. But I mean, the reality is, in a world of these huge differences of opinion, it takes great relational maturity to be in an authentic friendship with someone who really sees things different than you, and to not feel agitated, feel you have to escape that relationship, get angry, but just be in an open, curious real friendship with that person. And I think I think one of the ways we're being conformed is being told to kind of go back to our corners with people who think like us. And I think one way we grow in relational maturity is the ability to be in genuine friendships with those who might not see everything the way we do. Yeah, polarization. And then just more broadly, even just differences of opinion, conflict. This is a perennial one. But I in my opinion, like culturally, we are losing the ability to handle conflict well, and to work through conflict in healthy ways. And when I say conflict, I don't mean. I think sometimes in church settings, we can get confused and think, kind of in a church setting, handling conflict well means not having conflict. And so we can have patterns of avoidance and thinking that's what real peacemaking is. So I'm not talking about avoidance of conflict. In fact, I really believe that the presence of healthy conflict is a demonstration of trust. Because healthy conflict means you trust the person enough to have hard conversations. And so oftentimes, you see, where there is trust, there's the ability to have conflict. Now, some of you you're looking at and you're like, we really trust each other. Yeah. But oftentimes we avoid conflict when there's not enough trust to say hard things or have hard conversations or bring things up. And I just think that healthy conflict is critical. And navigating conflict well as part of growing in relational maturity, which is part of growing in spiritual maturity. I know I've seen this, in my work here, one place I'll see it show up at small groups. And a pattern that I've seen play out a number of times is a small group, people in a small group, they'll have differences of opinion. Somebody will have their feelings hurt. There'll be this pinch point. There'll be some tension in the room. And then the small group or a couple key people in the small group will have kind of a decision to make. Do we address it? Do we either as a group talk about it or have some kind of private conversations on the side where we have an honest, hey, this is how I'm feeling, this is how I'm experiencing this, what's that like for you? Do we do that? Or do we kind of say that's too much work, that'll be too hard, I don't know how that'll go, and we just kind of ignore it and we just move forward? And in my experience, the groups that say, hey, it's going to be tricky, it's going to be hard, but we're going to address this, we're going to have a hard, honest conversation about it, those groups generally find new vitality. And the groups that say, I don't want to deal with it, let's just kind of ignore it, pretend it didn't happen, those groups begin what, in my observation, is kind of a slow decline. Because if you can't be on it, because the whole premise of a small group to talk about what Jesus is doing in your life, to pray for one another, that the whole undergirding of that, it requires trust. The trust to be vulnerable, the trust to have hard conversations. And so when that trust goes away, the ability to have vibrant conversations go away. And so and this is true as small groups, it's true as families, friends. This is a reality, the ability to have healthy conflict. And I get there's toxic people in the world, there's places where it's just not safe. But I'm just talking about healthy conflict. Are we conformed into the patterns of unhealthy conflict? Or are we being transformed into the image of Jesus to have honest and honoring conversations with those we're relational about? Relational transformation is central to spiritual transformation. This is what I see throughout the New Testament. This is what I see in the book of Romans. And so and these are the kinds of things we're going to be talking about. And maybe just what do you identify with as you hear these things? What one of these is that is a challenge. That's a challenge for me. That's a challenge in my friendships. That is a place where I can grow. I think Jesus desires to see real change in the way we navigate these relationships. And Hillcrest, and maybe you're thinking, but Tim, Hillcrest, weird. This is a warm and relational place. It is a warm and relational place. And we still need to grow in this. We did, I don't know, you remember back in the fall, we did the church health survey. A number of you filled it out as an online survey. They're on that church health survey. There are 7, they call it 7 factors of human flourishing. And these 7 kind of characteristics that, people, to have a full flourishing life, you want to be growing in. One Hillcrest, we did great on the spiritual component. It's so cool. Like when people talked about the priority of Jesus in their lives, how much they trust God's word, like it was very high. 91 out of 100. I don't even know exactly what it means. That's A-, I guess. But you know what our lowest score was, kind of as a community? Relational satisfaction, 72. And what is that, 72? But comparatively to the other things, people said, that just less satisfaction in knowing and being known by others. And so this is an area that God says relational transformation is central to spiritual transformation. All right, so how do we do this? I want to talk about just where the power to change comes from. And I think we go back to verse 1 of where the power to live differently comes from. Because Paul, when he began this whole thing, he says, "Therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy." The whole starting idea is look back on God's mercy for us in Jesus of Nazareth. And out of your gratitude of that, offer your bodies. Do not conform. Be transformed. You could even translate this in view of God's mercy. You could translate it through God's mercy. Do we have a slide that says that, Aaron? I don't remember. Through God's mercy. Through God's mercy. Through what Jesus has done for you, through being grasped by it, be transformed. It's that being grasped by the love of God for you in Jesus of Nazareth, it's the ground of our relational transformation. It's the means of our relational transformation. And even if you're a skeptic, you're like, I'm not sure what I think about God. First of all, if you're a skeptic, I think we can agree relationships are important to life, right? Remember that? Okay, now we're going to get back. Remember the study I mentioned at the beginning? The Harvard study? You might have guessed it. The one factor that leads to health and happiness more than anything in a person's life. Let's go to that quote. This is from a summary of it. It's the longest in-depth longitudinal study on human life ever done, and it's brought us to a simple and profound conclusion. Good relationships lead to health and happiness. So regardless of kind of your faith commitments, I think we can agree on the importance of relationships. But I think we can also agree on the challenge of good relationships. That if you're anything like me, that you probably have a little 7th grade Tim in you too. That we can be uncaring and apathetic and self-centered, and these relationships they break down. And where do we get the power to live differently? And in my experience, what I believe is that we, like the ability to really love others well, I think to be deeply secure in our own belovedness allows us to love others well. To be deeply secure in your own beloved identity before God, like deeply in your bones grasped by that, it allows you to enter into relationships in a more healthy manner. Our deepest desires is to be fully known, even the ugly parts, and at the same time be fully loved. And I believe ultimately that comes from Jesus of Nazareth. I think about one time I was meeting with a guy here at Hillcrest. He doesn't attend here anymore. But he was mid-30s, married, a couple young kids, kind of getting his career going. And we had lunch together, and he was sharing his story with me. And he talked about earlier in life, he had been burnt by church in some ways, and he was kind of growing kind of cynical about the church, kind of cynical about faith, and kind of beginning this deconstruction. I don't know about this stuff. And kind of this general like gray blah had settled over his life, and it was showing up in his marriage relationship. It was showing up in the way he related to his kids. It was showing up how he related to his coworkers. And he shared about this experience he had of being in worship. And he just said it was like, he described it as a mystical encounter with Jesus. That it was almost like a physical force of being immersed in Jesus' love for him. He said he's never experienced anything like it. That he was just immersed. It wasn't a set of ideas. It was just an encounter of being grasped by God's love for him and Jesus. And also being grasped by how God loved others that way as well. And I was meeting with him after this, and he's like, I've just been different. It's like I was a comet in orbit around one planet, and I got pulled over, and now I'm orbiting another planet. I relate to my kids differently. I relate to those I work with differently. I relate to my wife differently, because I just have been grasped by how deeply I am loved. And I just naturally relate to others differently because of it. And I think spiritual transformation, some of us will have the gift of moments like that. And some of us, it'll be a slow outworking of encountering the love of God in small ways through his word and through prayer and through others over and over again. It doesn't always look the same, but I believe the way that through God's mercy leads to do not conform and be transformed into relationships is that it allows us this deep grounding, this deep security in our own belovedness in the Abba through Jesus that gives us the ability to then be present to others. It gives us the ability to acknowledge our own faults and failings. It gives us the ability to handle conflicts with grace. It gives us the ability to be in ongoing friendships with those who see the world differently. That this is where it begins. Now, I know some of us will be like, but Tim, I have been hurt deeply by people who call themselves Christians. Yes, let's get together and share stories sometimes. Like I know that's real. Like I'm not saying this is not like press the button, pray the prayer, and now everything's fine. Like this is a lifetime. The whole reason Paul has to write this, Paul recognizes it doesn't happen automatically. This is a lifetime process of transformation. Stumbling and getting up again. So I recognize it's not an automatic thing, and that we will meet people who call themselves Christians, and they'll use the name Christian, and they'll just you'll know there's just this coldness or this anger right beneath the surface. Like we've met people like this before. Like it's not this automatic thing, and frankly we don't always know the person's story. Because sometimes we'll have our atheist neighbor who had a wonderful, loving family growing up, and we'll then interact with our Christian neighbor who had a traumatic childhood, and you don't know all this person has gone through. So I'm not saying it's this automatic thing, but I don't think having those experiences of hurt change the fact of God's heart for you to be grounded in this belovedness, and for you to be transformed in how you relate to others, and for you to experience these kinds of relationships towards yourself as well. And this is God's heart for us. So it's through God's mercy. So I want to send us off with two practical questions, kind of beginning places of reflection for this series. Two questions. You write these down. I encourage on your own, you're journaling. And the two questions would be this. Question number one. How would you evaluate the overall relational health in your life? It's just good. Where? The width, the depth, to reflect on that. Honesty, the honoring. Spend some time journaling, praying. And then the second one, I would encourage you to ask a couple trusted people in your life about how they perceive your relational strengths and how they perceive the places you could grow in. There's going to need to be someone you trust. I think these are good questions to ask. What do I bring to the relationship setting? What do I bring that's a gift? What are places that I could grow? I think these, to reflect on these, to invite someone in, would be a good step to begin. And even, here's a check-in. That second one, my guess is in a room this size, there's probably a couple of us who heard this second one, ask a couple trusted friends, and your reaction was, yeah, that's dumb, I'll never do that. Right? Maybe a little check-in would be, how did you even respond to the idea of doing these things? I think one measure of relational maturity is the awareness of how we impact the people around us. The awareness of how we impact the people around us. One way to grow in that is ask people. Ask people we trust. Yeah. And the worship team can come on back up here, but here's the big picture is this. Jesus says to grow in spiritual maturity is to grow in love of God with our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to grow in our love of neighbors. Central to spiritual transformation is relational transformation. That we begin to see others more like Jesus does, to feel about them more like Jesus does, to handle conflict with more grace, to handle difference with more curiosity, that we have a deeper security, that we have more courage to have hard conversations. And this is not something that we do by ourselves. This is God's heart for us. God wants this for us. And he says, come to Jesus over and over again. Be grounded and rooted in him. Begin with him. This is what he desires for us. Let me pray for us and we'll move back into worship. Jesus, I just thank you. I thank you that you are at work with us. You are so patient. You work with us our entire lives. You meet us where we're at. You know our wounds. You know the potholes of our souls. You are gracious, and yet you never settle. You always see the good more that we could become. And so, Lord, just individually over these weeks, would you work on our hearts that shows up in real ways in our relational lives? Yeah, we pray this in your name. Amen.
Thanks for listening. For more info, visit hcbellingham.com and join us any Sunday, 9 and 11 a.m.